The rest of the world sees America as the wealthiest nation on the entire planet. But when we take a closer look at the hardships our population is facing, we can rapidly realize that there's a tremendous amount of financial suffering in the United States, and that's getting dramatically worse with each passing year. Today, more money goes towards the pockets of the rich than ever before. Over the past few decades, we've been witnessing the greatest event of wealth transfer in the history of our nation without even realizing it. While billionaire CEOs like Mark Zuckenberg make over 1 million times more than the average American worker every year, many families out there whose parents work themselves to the bone every single day will still struggle to find what to eat and where to sleep with their children tonight. These disparities make us question whether the United States is indeed a rich nation or a nation for the rich. The answer is up to interpretation, but you can have a clearer picture about this issue at the end of this video. Because today, we have gathered some staggering stats that expose that poverty in the United States is wildly out of control. But before checking this list, please don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our future videos. Thank you. Now, here are 25 facts about the explosive growth of poverty in America that will blow your mind. 1. According to the latest numbers released by the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey, 13.4% of Americans live below the poverty line. This equals more than 42.5 million people. 2. From December 2021 to January 2022, the monthly child poverty rate increased from 12.1% to 17%. A 4.9% increase in poverty means that approximately 3.7 million more children have fallen into poverty due to the expiration of the child tax credit payments. 3. Other numbers from the U.S. Census Bureau are also quite disturbing. For instance, in 2007, about 1 out of every 8 children in America was on food stamps. Today, 1 in every 5 children collects SNAP benefits to ensure food security. 4. Nearly 40 million families receive government assistance to have enough to eat every month. At the end of 2021, 41.5 million people were receiving federal aid to get food, and in January 2022, an additional 6 million Americans qualified for food stamps. 5. Extreme poverty continues to grow all across the country. According to an analysis released by the University of Chicago, at least 336,000 households with children live on less than $2 a day. That's a group known as the ultra-poor. 6. Feeding America data shows that around 60 million Americans turn to food banks, food pantries, and other private food assistance programs each year. In some locations, lines start forming as early as 6:30 in the morning because parents want to get something for their children to eat before the food supplies run out. 7. More than 1 in 3 children live in households burdened by housing costs, meaning more than 30% of their family income goes toward housing payments. Amongst renters, 61% of children live in rent-burdened, low-income households. 8. Around 2.6 million families with children experience worst-case housing needs, which means they are extremely rent-burdened. Their income is at or below the poverty line, so they have to spend half of their income or more on housing alone. and receive no housing assistance from the government. 9. According to Poverty USA, 20% of the homeless in America are children. Last year, it's estimated that roughly 2 million American children slept in a homeless shelter or some other form of emergency housing. 10. Amid skyrocketing housing and rent prices, at least 600,000 Americans remain in a group known as the unhoused. Right now, we are still trending in the wrong direction, explained Anthony Love, Interim Executive Director at the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. When the public is told that one particular policy is going to end homelessness, what they're expecting is that they're going to see fewer homeless people around, added Stephen Ide, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. What they haven't considered yet is that housing has to come first, Ide stressed. 11. There's no official government data that tracks the true rate of homelessness. Government agencies classify those without reliable access to shelter as unhoused, but measurements released by housing advocates estimate that between 8 to 10 million people are living in the streets across the United States. 12. One of America's richest states, California, is currently facing a homelessness catastrophe of devastating proportions. Since 2010, the number of unhoused people in the state rose by 31%, led by a 57% increase in the number of people with no access to a shelter. It's just not acceptable, emphasized Wendy Carrillo, a state assembly member who represents parts of LA and chairs a budget committee on homelessness. We've become so disconnected as a society, so cold to the issue, that people are okay with stepping over someone who is passed out on the floor, she lamented. 13. According to UCLA estimates, more than 1.5 million renters in California spend half of their earnings on rent, leaving them potentially one medical emergency or one crisis away from homelessness. 14. Poverty thresholds are determined by the U.S. government and vary according to the size of a family and the ages of its members. The poverty threshold, also known as the poverty line for an individual, stands at $12,784. For two people, the weighted average threshold is $16,247. Right now, 5.3% of the population, or 17.3 million people, live in deep poverty, with incomes below 50% of their poverty thresholds. And about 29.9% of the population, or 93.6 million, live close to poverty, with incomes less than 2 times that of their poverty thresholds. 15. According to the Annie E. Casey Foundation, areas of concentrated poverty are defined as census tracts, where the overall poverty rate checks in at 30% or more. Nationwide, 12% of all children, or more than 8.5 million, live in concentrated poverty. These neighborhoods typically lack healthy food options, good public schools, and quality medical care. High-poverty neighborhoods are also more likely to expose residents to high rates of offenses and environmental hazards such as lead and smog. 16. A December 2021 study conducted by the Pew Research Center found that 41.4% of Americans are classified as low-income individuals or low-income families. While the official poverty rate in the U.S. is only 13.4%, people earning even twice as much are hardly making sufficient amounts of money to afford surging living expenses. They're still scrambling to get by and often making well below the living wage. In other words, that means that 89,679,000 Americans are struggling with around $30,000 in annual income. When you include dependents into that equation, the situation becomes even more complicated. 17. The gap between the rich and the rest of the population is worsening. On average, the top 1% of earners make 20 times more than the bottom 90% every year. Specifically, the 1% collectively own $43.27 trillion, while the bottom 90% earn $40.28 trillion combined. 18. Research by Edwards and Price at the Rand Corporation shows that the U.S. workers' income has been redistributed upwards at a shocking rate. Over the past 45 years, the 1% have drained $50 trillion from the bottom 90%. Their calculation shows that without the wealth transfer, the median wage would have been $19,000 higher over the past 4 years, and inequality in America would have been much lower. 19. The wealth disparity grows the higher up the ladder we climb. Even the mid-level 1%ers can't reach the gigantic amounts earned by the ultra-rich. Today, to be counted amongst the top 5% income earners, you'd have to earn at least $320,096 per year, according to the Economic Policy Institute. This figure further exposes the huge disparity in income. It's roughly 6 times higher than the average wage in the country. Meanwhile, the top 1% earn more than twice as much, around $758,434, and those in the 0.1% group earn as much as $2,888,192 per year. 20. Forbes data shows that 747 billionaires own 2/3 more than the bottom 50% of U.S. households. While the bottom 50% own $3 trillion in wealth, this handful of U.S. billionaires owns over $5 billion. Before the health crisis, they only owned as much as the bottom 50%. 21. Federal Reserve data reveals that 89.7% of shares in America are owned by the wealthiest 10%. It's not surprising that the wealthy tend to have greater equity in terms of shares and assets, but that's a disproportionate distribution of shares that could account for the top 10% recovering faster than the rest of the population after the subprime crisis in 2008. 22. The average salary for workers in America only increased by 13.7% from the years 2000 to 2020, and that's a dismal 0.68% increase per year. However, in 2000, the inflation rate was at 3.36%, and now the latest inflation rate has climbed to 8.5%, which means that the average salary in the U.S. has not kept pace with inflation, further skewing wealth distribution in the United States. 23. On the other hand, the top 1% have seen their income soar by 160% since 1979, while the bottom 90% of Americans had seen a growth of only 26% during that same period. The top 1% have had their income more than double in the last 40 years. 24. By comparison, billionaire CEO Elon Musk earns 2.43 million times more than the average middle-class worker in a year, according to Forbes data, while Jeff Bezos makes 1.73 million times more, and Bill Gates earns 1.14 million times more than the average American worker every year. 25. Meanwhile, the United States ranks second in terms of poverty rates amongst developed nations tracked by the OECD. Compared to other developed countries, America is one of the worst in terms of those living below the poverty line. Income and wealth inequality in the United States is the pressing issue of our time. With all things considered, are we really that rich and that great as a nation after all?